Now we're going to bring back Charlie Storrar to do a scripture reading from a recently refound book of the New Testament called Funny Bones. Everyone, give it up.
Yeah, thanks very much there, lad. Thanks very much there, Brother Go. Yeah. You know, Brother Go, when I first met you, that was the first time, that was the thing you did, you know, because you were there at the Red Room. Right, so has anyone been to the Red Room?
Oh, aye.
I was there, the Red Room, and at the Red Room, he was the redneck in the Red Room. He was doing his thing where he like read a children's story, and he was supposed to take 5 minutes, but he took 20. That's what he did. That, and he read that book. It was called The Giving Tree, I think. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight, you could shove your Shel Silverstein up your ass because you should be reading good English children's books. You've probably never even heard of Roger McGough, have you? He was the best children's writer ever. He wrote The Great Smile Robbery. He was from Liverpool. He was in a band with Paul McCartney's brother. Well, okay then. Well, I'm not going to read that one. I'm going to read this one by Janet and Allan Ahlberg called Funny Bones, which is also... You see, you gave your political analysis just as that troubled young man did earlier. He gave the analysis of the very hungry caterpillar, and you gave your analysis of the Giving Tree. But I have to tell you, I found your analysis to be shallow and uninsightful.
Oh, snap.
So I'm going to show you how it should be done. This was a book that was very popular in the UK back in the 1980s when I was growing up, and it's called Funny Bones. So I'm going to start from the beginning, and I'll explain to you as we go.
Slowly, slowly.
On a dark, dark hill, there was a dark, dark town. And in the dark, dark town, there was a dark, dark street. And in the dark, dark street, there was a dark, dark house. And in the dark, dark house, there was a dark, dark staircase. And down the dark, dark staircase, there was a dark, dark cellar. And in the dark, dark cellar, some skeletons lived. There was a big skeleton. There was a little skeleton. They even had a fucking dog skeleton. You can see it right there. I photocopied it. We don't buy anything in Liverpool. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is like a cute story about skeletons. Well, it's not. It's not, okay. This is a critique of Margaret Thatcher's economic policy. Yeah, because these weren't skeletons at all, you see. These were working class people whose lifeblood, the communities, they were just destroyed. Yeah. See, these people, these ones you see on the front cover, skeletons, they used to work at the docks. Yeah, not anymore, there's no jobs there now at the docks. Not in shipbuilding or mining or steel or textiles, you know, all these traditional industries of the north of England, they've all been gutted. So they've been reduced to skeletons, you see. They're phantoms. They can live only in the dark, dark cellar, in the dark, dark corridor, in the dark, dark fucking house because they've been forgotten. They've been relegated to the darkest corner of society. So, here's what happens. So one night, the big skeleton sat up in bed. He scratched his skull. What shall we do tonight? You see, there's nothing for them to do. Nothing. Let's take the dog for the walk, said the little skeleton. We'll frighten somebody. See, they've just got these primitive pleasures, that's all that's left to them. Smoking and drinking and fornicating and watching TV.
Amen.
And all they've got, well, it's alright for you, isn't it? It's alright for you. See, the dog is the only thing that's lower than them in the pecking order. They can control the dog. That's the only thing they can boss around. And yet, so you notice the words, let's go out and frighten somebody. Let's go out and frighten somebody. So despite how far they've fallen, how powerless and disenfranchised they are, the ruling class still fears them. Fears their anger, fears that power that they could bring to bear if only they were able to organise themselves, but they're not. So the big skeleton and the little skeleton and the dog skeleton, they left the dark, dark cellar and they climbed the dark, dark staircase. and they stepped out into the dark, dark street, and they walked past the houses and the shops. They walked past the zoo and the police station, and they went into the park. Now you notice they're all closed. It's night. You see, they've got access to these public areas, but only when the toffs and the middle class aren't using them. Yeah. And so the big skeleton now, he says, what shall we do now? You see, he doesn't know. It's the language of despair. Let's play on the swings, said the little skeleton. And he said, good idea. We'll frighten someone. You see, he's still clinging to this hope that they can still frighten the ruling class back into giving them back what they've lost, but they can't. So the big skeleton and the little skeleton and the dog skeleton walked around the dark, dark park, and they went to the dark, dark swings, and the big skeleton and the little skeleton played on the swings, and they threw a stick for the dog, and then suddenly something happened. It's terrible, this bit. See, the dog skeleton, he chased the stick and he tripped on the park bench, and he bumped into a tree, and he ended up on the ground as a little pile of bones. Now this was a park bench. It was a public asset. So what we see here is that in this system, even the systems that they put in place for their welfare, they end up doing them harm. These all come to pieces, the skeletons are crying. And they say, well, what should we do now? Well, let's try and put him back together again. And they do. And you see that here they're using the resourcefulness and the resilience of the working class. The big skeleton, the little skeleton, they put the dog, they pick up the bones and they're trying to fashion something that's dead. They're trying to put it back together and make life. You know, that's a metaphor, that is. And they sang a song while they did it. The toe bone's connected to the foot bone's connected to the leg bone's connected to the hip bone's connected to the backbone. Yeah, you know what they were singing there? That's what before we would have called a Negro spiritual. They're singing the songs of the slaves. Yeah, that's another metaphor right there, see. When they finished, just reflects, you know, the depravity and the lack of agency that they fall into. Anyway, when they finish, the big skeleton says, that dog looks a bit funny to me. And the little skeleton says, so he does, you've put the tail on the wrong end, and you've put his head on the other end where his tail's supposed to be. And so what this speaks of looking back at past glory, so there's nothing to look forward to in the future, you see.
Also, it poops out its mouth.
It also poops out of its mouth, just like the Tory government did. Anyway, at last the dog was put back together properly. And they said, oh, all right, well, reminds me, we forgot to frighten anyone. We haven't done that yet. And they said, oh, good idea, let's do that on the way home. So they left the dark, dark swings. They went looking for someone to frighten. And the big skeleton says, I wish we had a nice little boy to frighten. And the little skeleton said, I wish we had a nice old lady. You see, they can't fight back at people who put them there. All they can do, they're just trying to pick on the weak and the people who are lower than them. That's what they've been reduced to. But they try and find someone to frighten, but the trouble was there wasn't anybody because everyone was in bed. You know, the honest, decent middle class, they were in bed, they were sleeping. That's what they were doing, they were ignoring them. They were ignorant of their plight. Even the policemen in the police station were sleeping. So don't look to them. The people you're supposed to protect you, they're not going to protect you. Even the animals in the zoo were sleeping. Of course, it says, the skeleton animals were awake. So they go into the zoo and they play with the skeleton animals. Because that's the only ones that they can fraternise with. The people on their level. It's like apartheid. See, in fact, it's worse than apartheid. It's a segregation based on class and socio-economic status. You occupy the same space, but you've got no basis for interaction with this privileged class. Let's have a ride on the elephant skeleton, one of them says. They do that, they have a ride. Let's have a word with the parrot skeleton.
Good evening all. Who's a pretty boy then? Have a cup of tea. Put the kettle on, mother.
See, they're mimicking normal human interaction because that's all they can do. And then they leave the zoo, and the big skeleton, he says his catchphrase, he says, what do we do now? And then one says, well, let's frighten each other. It's better than nothing, but no one else to frighten, will frighten each other. So they did. They hid round corners and frightened each other. They jumped out of dustbins and frightened each other all the way home. So we see that the downtrodden working class, all they can do in the end is turn on each other. In the end, they're no threat to anyone except themselves. And then the ruling class, they kind of look down on them and they say, well, you're savages, we'll just leave you to it. We'll leave you to it, that's what we'll do. And then we won't have to pretend you don't exist. We won't have to feel guilty, you know, about your status, because you're the ones who finished yourselves off. Yeah. And that's how the story ends. On a dark, dark hill, there was a dark, dark house. And in the dark, dark house, there was a dark, dark staircase. And in the dark, dark staircase, there was a dark, dark cellar. And in the dark, dark cellar, some skeletons lived. They still do. That's the tragedy. They still fucking do.